everyone! So today I just wanted to run through the various steps that it takes to actually write a book. I know I talked about my publishing process, which sort of skimmed over pieces of the writing process. But today I wanted to go slightly more in depth. Maybe not super in depth, but at any rate we will be focusing on the writing process. Dog is chasing your tail. If the dog stops distracting me. Whoop! You knocked the camera over. Ada, you gotta settle down. Starts with ideas, generally speaking. I don't know how it works for other people, but the ideas for me come in varying forms. Sometimes I'll get an idea while reading a different book. Sometimes I'll get an idea while writing one of my books. Sometimes I'll get an idea from dreams, or when I'm just driving a car and they just pop in my head for no reason at all. Ideas just come out of nowhere. Now, for me, when I get my ideas, I generally write down said ideas, because my ideas come in like bursts of passion and inspiration, and I have to get it out or I'm going to explode. So I'll sit down and write for a little bit, 15 minutes, an hour, however long it is. And that usually ends up being like the first 2 or 3 chapters of a book. And then I'll do my brainstorming and outlining, and then sometimes those ideas, just those 2 or 3 chapters end up being a sort of like guide or outline or like an idea that I can use, but not necessarily the actual story once I start outlining and writing. Sometimes after the outlining process, those first 2 or 3 chapters that I wrote in the first burst of inspiration are what ends up being the first 2 or 3 chapters of the story. Or they move around and end up like chapter 6 and 7, but you know what I mean. Like they stay in the story. And it's always different. And there's always varying degrees of detail. Sometimes I know most of the storylines, sometimes I know like a character name and a possible setting, and I don't have a clue what's going on. So anyway, it starts with ideas. And then after that, there's a lot of brainstorming and figuring out this crazy idea you had, does it actually work as a story? So the brainstorming begins. Like, what sort of things could happen to this character in this setting that I've just randomly thought of in my head? And playing things out a little bit in your mind, or in mine, or whoever's mind is making the story. And once you've mulled over it for a while, a few hours, a few weeks, a few months, however long it takes, sometimes that changes too. Sometimes I sit down and just start writing a story the minute an idea comes. Sometimes I let it sit up there for months on end until I decide it's ready for the next step in the writing process. So after I get an idea and I think about it for a while, think about different possibilities, brainstorm a bit. Sometimes brainstorming, I'll write things down, like different ideas and things. Sometimes brainstorming remains in my head. As soon as that's through and I'm ready to actually make a story, I do the outlining of said story, which also involves a lot of brainstorming. They kind of go hand in hand. Now, outlining is something I used to never do. I avoided outlines like nothing else. I hated outlines. I hated the idea of outlines. Outlines were the last thing I was ever going to do. And then I did an outline and really found that I actually enjoyed doing outlines. I mean, they were great for my stories and gave them more direction and all sorts of good stuff. But on top of that, I just legitimately enjoyed making outlines. So I do outlines now. And it actually does really help my stories. There's a lot less bunny trails, less plot holes, hopefully. Maybe not, but hopefully. It seems like there's less plot holes. And there's not random scenes that have nothing to do with the story and don't further the plot at all. So outlines are very helpful. After that, I actually start writing the book. So that kind of varies for each story with me, but I do, when I get my ideas, write a few chapters of the story that's exploding in my head. And then I brainstorm and outline. And then when I start writing, I go back to that portion that I'd already written and use it, expand on it, write a story. Just write and write and write and write. the main thing to remember is that writing has to happen on a regular basis. It has to be a daily practice, or 5 days a week, or whenever, but it has to be regular. Whether you have inspiration or not, you have to sit down and write. Because that's the only way to actually finish a novel, is to sit down and write it. As soon as you finish the first draft, the editing begins, which is so much fun. For me, this tends to involve going through my story to make sure it's consistent and there aren't random plot holes and things. Like with my very first novel, I finished Lucy's Legend. I went over it with some of my family members and discovered that my timeline was crazy, and my main character, Marion, was 18, and then like 2 paragraphs later she was 19, and it was just crazy. So I read through it when I finish it. Usually not directly afterward. I let a week go by, sometimes longer than that, so that I can come at it with fresh eyes and read through it and make sure there's no random things like a character changing ages at random points in time. And then I'll go through it for glaring grammatical errors and things of that nature that I notice. And then when that's done, I've gone through it a few times, doing some editing, doing some revising and rewriting if I need to. Sometimes that happens when I read over it. I see things that definitely need to change, or have things that I want to add, scenes that were missed, or stuff. And then after that, I send it out to beta readers and editors, and that is all on them, and I get their feedback, and I make changes, and sometimes I have to go back to editors. And then after that, I publish it, which we've already covered in a different video. So that's basically it. Ideas come at random points in time, and then I'll write down my ideas, or part of the story, whatever is up there in my head, and then I brainstorm and actually come up with a real story to go with whatever craziness I wrote down. And then I outline that story, and then I start writing it, and sometimes use what I wrote in my original idea burst of inspiration, and sometimes I don't. But I write the story, and then edit it, and then publish it. That's basically the writing process. That's all I've got. Happy writing, everybody.